So the route we're going to take for this demonstration flight is from here, starting from here, Mike Golf Yankees, the airport, to Charlie Juliet, it's an NDB station, and then to Plum intersection, and then off to Tarto intersection, and then that's the destination, which is Portsmouth Regional Airport. It's a total distance of 130 nautical miles. This is just for practicing the Garmin 430 setup, IFR procedures, and the autopilot setup, and so on. So this here is the Xplane setup. It's a Cessna 182 RG. We have a Garmin 430 here, a GFC500 autopilot, 2 G5s, and a tablet. First task is to get our clearance, which I will play.
November 7311 Sierra. Hold for release. You are cleared to the Portsmouth Regional Airport as filed. Climb and maintain 3000. Expect 5000. 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency is 118.85. Squawk 5221.
Okay, so let's use that clearance. So departure frequency was 118.85, which we can put it into our standby. And the active is the CTAV 122.8, and transponder is 5221. We'll go ahead and set up the route on the Garmin 430. If you hit the flight plan, it'll take you to the active flight plan, which is currently empty. We're going to put our flight plan into the catalog, which is flight plan 2. All the saved flight plans will stay here. Right now there's none. So let's go ahead and create a new flight plan with the menu key and start from our airport where we're starting, which is Mike Golf Yankee. Sometimes it's faster to go backwards in the alphabet. And the next fix is Charlie Juliet. And the next one is Plum. And the next one is Tarto. And then our destination, which is Papa Mike Hotel. So we have the flight plan loaded, starting from Mike Golf Yankee, ending at the destination. We could also load in the expected approach at the destination by hitting the menu key and scrolling down. There is the select approach, and by default it'll bring up the destination airport's approaches, and we're going to pick the RNAV 18, and then it'll ask for the transition. We can pick vectors or any one of those other transitions. Let's just say NAUGT transition, and then load. And now if we scroll down past the end of the flight plan, you'll see the approach has been loaded in. There's the NAUGT and NAUGT, this is the final approach fix, and the missed approach point at the runway, and the missed hold. So they're all loaded in. So if we get out of this by exiting the cursor, and the flight plan has been saved, it uses the source and destination airports as the default name for the flight plan. We could now go ahead and select it and activate it. And activation puts it into flight plan page number 1. That's the active flight plan, and it'll also activate the leg that's appropriate for our current location. So we are sitting on the ground at this airport, so it knows this is the appropriate leg to activate. So flight plan has been activated on the GPS. So the best screen to remain during flight is the nav page 1. It shows the CDI, our leg, the active leg, the track, desired track, and the actual track, distances and ground speeds, altitudes and times, and so on. If you go to nav 2, it'll show a map page. This is our active leg, and then the next legs are shown in white. If you zoom out, you can see the rest of them. So this, we'll glance at this once in a while, but our main page is going to be nav 1. We could also go and set up our tablet, and I've already loaded a map in here. So this is our route. This is an image from SkyVector that's calibrated for this route. So this is going to show us our position, and the little icon is going to follow along the track. So we have those set up. We can also go set up the autopilot. So our first altitude is 3,000 feet. So we can dial in 3,000, and it's going to show. It's showing up right here. There's 3,000 feet. We're going to get a heading on departure, so we'll engage that once we get the information. We're going to hold a certain vertical speed through that 3,000, and the vertical speed, let's say, is 1,000 feet a minute. And the heading, we'll put the heading in once we get that number. So our next step is to get our release for this clearance.
November 7311 Sierra, you are released for departure. Enter controlled airspace on a heading of 060. Clearance void in 5 minutes. Time now 15320.
Okay, we got our release. We're supposed to enter controlled airspace on a heading of 060, so we can put that in here. 060. There it is, 060. So let's give it one check over. We got 118.85 dialed in, 5221 on the squawk. We are on alt mode. 060, vertical speed of 1,000. So we should be all set to go. Get the gear up. And we could turn on the autopilot. Which will take us on a heading of 060 at 1,000 feet a minute. And we could also switch to the departure frequency. Okay, that's the 1,000 foot alert prior to reaching the 3,000 feet set altitude. And since we're at a safe altitude, we can pull the power back to the top of the green. 200-foot alert, and it switches to altitude mode and levels off.
November 7, 311 Sierra. Climb to 5,000. Proceed on course.
Okay, so now we're given instruction to climb to 5,000, so we can set that to 5. And vertical speed, we'll set it to 1,000 feet again. So it's climbing at 1,000 feet a minute to 5,000, and we are told to resume our course. And we're right now on the heading mode, 060, so we should, which is almost the same as our desired course, 056, but we should switch the autopilot from heading mode to nav mode. So when I do that, it's going to now track the GPS course. And we can take a peek at the NAV2 page. There it is, the map page. We are still on the same course as expected, and it'll get sequenced to the next leg once we cross that nav aid. And we'll go back to our NAV1 page. So we've got 20 miles to go. And there's the 1,000-foot alert again. It's going to give us an alert and switch from vertical speed to altitude hold mode. There's the 200-foot alert, and there's the switch, and it's leveling off. Okay, so it's going to continue this course up to the next nav aid, which is 18 miles away. Okay, we're getting close to the first fix, Charlie Charlie Juliet. And as we get close, it's going to switch and turn, and it's going to switch our leg to the next waypoint, to Plum. 1 mile to go. There's giving us a turn guidance. 077 is going to be the next heading. And there it's starting the turn, and you'll see the direction indicator is also turned. And the leg is already switched to Plum. And if we look on the NAV2 page, you'll see that here the next leg is now active. The one in purple is the active, the white ones are inactive lines. Okay, so we're going to proceed on up to the next fix, Plum, and then from there we're going to turn again to the next fix, which is Tarto. Okay, so we are coming up to Plum, 1 mile to go. And the next heading is going to be 128. And there it is, starting to turn. And that's That's our new direction. So that leg is 46 miles away, or the Tarto is 46 miles away. So now, let's say instead of continuing on, what we want to do is to fly a practice approach into this airport here, Lancaster Fairfield County Airport, which is down here, which has a VOR Alpha approach off of the VOR station that's up here. And that approach is not aligned to the runway. It's in fact is very close to 90 degrees to the runway. So we want to fly that practice approach and then continue on to our destination. So we're going to call up ATC and request that approach.
11 Sierra, roger, turn left heading 030, descend and maintain 3000.
Okay, so we got our instruction to turn to 030, so we should put that into the heading bug. 030. It's not going to turn because we are still currently flying on the nav. We can take it out of the nav and it's still not going to turn because the servos are engaged, but it's not giving it any guidance where to go. So now if we push in the heading, it'll start to turn to 030. Next, we have to descend to 3000, so we can put in 3000 feet. Again, it's not going to descend until we go to vertical speed and dial in a required vertical speed. So there it is, descending and turning at the same time. We should pull the power back a little bit so it doesn't get too fast. So there it is. It's the leg, active leg is still plumb to Tarto, but we are flying away from it on a 030 heading. You can take a look on the nav2 page, and there's the active leg, and we are flying away from it. Okay, so now we need to load the approach into the flight plan. If you go into the active flight plan, the approach that's there is the RNAV-18 that we originally loaded. That's for the Portsmouth airport, not the one for Lancaster. So we need to replace that with the Lancaster approach. Unfortunately, on the 430, you can only load one approach. So there's room for one approach, so we have to replace this approach with the Lancaster's approach and then be able to replace it again when we want to resume our course to Portsmouth. So that's what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss how to put in new approaches in here and a few other little details about the Garmin 430, and then we'll also discuss a few details about the GFC500 autopilot. So during this discussion, I'm just going to let the airplane fly on this heading, and after that I'll reposition the airplane back here and then continue on the approach. Okay, how to load an approach into the 430. It could be a bit confusing because there's multiple ways you could do it, but once you understand the logic behind it, it starts to make a lot more sense. So what you got to do is find the page that contains the approach. The approach is in the waypoint menu, page number 4. So the first method to load an approach is to go to that page. So we are on nav menu, page 1. If you go to waypoint, page 1 is just the name of the airport. You could go to page 2, which contains the runway information. Page 3 contains frequencies. This is useful because you could actually highlight the frequency, and so if you hit enter, it'll put that frequency into standby, which is very convenient compared to typing frequencies. So you hit enter, goes into standby, then you can activate it. But page 4 is where the approaches are. So this is where we were originally when we loaded the approach. By default is bringing up the airport that we viewed last time on the waypoint menu. So now what we have to do this time is to change the airport code to Lancaster. So we could do that. Lancaster. Hit enter. It goes to the approach page. It shows the one approach, but you can use the small knob to invoke that pull down menu, and then you'll see VOR-A here. You hit enter, it goes to the next box. What type of transition? There's two here, vectors, so APE, which is the VOR. Let's pick that. So we've selected everything, and now we have to load it into the flight plan page, and that's in here. We hit menu, you can say load into active flight plan or load and activate. Let's just hit load into the active flight plan, and now in the flight plan page you will see this approach loaded in. So there's VOR-A starting at Appleton, JUBBI, MAGCO, and then missed approach hold at the same VOR. Alright, so that's method number one of how to load the approach into the GPS. The disadvantage of doing it that way, going to waypoint page and then waypoint 4 and then typing in everything, there's a lot of keystrokes. There's another way you can do it. So this is method number 2. Go to the nearest airport page, NRST. The first page is airports, second one is intersections and NDBs and various things. So we want the airport. If you could find the airport you want on this page here, then that'll save you from typing in the airport code. So let's go down the list and see if Lancaster is here. It may not, depending on how far away it is. There's only limits a certain number of airports listed here. Okay, it's not here, so the airport is a little too far away. That's okay. So we'll just, for example here, let's say we wanted instead to fly the approach at this airport, Mansfield. You can hit enter. If you hit enter, it'll take you to waypoint page number 1 automatically. So it helps you and it'll also type in the airport code, so it'll save you the trouble of having to type in that. If you hit enter here, it's going to say done and return it back to where you were, which is not what you want. And by this time the position of the airport might have changed because this airplane is moving, so you got to go back in there. You can disable the cursor and then go to waypoint 2 page, runways, frequencies, and then back to waypoint 4, which is where the approach is. So here is this airport code that you didn't have to type in this time, and then you can go down here to the approaches and pick the one that you wanted. Let's say it's that, and then you can load, and it's loaded into the active flight plan. So this is method number 2. It's got a slight advantage. You didn't have to type in the airport code. If you're buried inside some menu system and you want to get back to the home screen, which is nav 1, press and hold CLR. That'll always bring it back. It's the shortcut to get to the home page. Okay, so the third method, you have to go into the flight plan. You could be in the active flight plan or on the saved flight plan. Let's go into the active, hit menu and scroll down. There is a command called select approach. This is actually a prompted method. It'll kind of walk you through and it'll pull down the menus for you, make it a little bit easier to enter the approach. So select approach. If you hit enter, it'll take you to the approach that you last loaded in. So it's brought you to waypoint 4 page. You didn't have to scroll through it. It's brought it to waypoint 4 page, and it's put the cursor into the approach field, and it's turned the little knob and it's showing the pull down menu. So it's done all of that for you. All you got to do if you want to change the approach, for example, is to go down here, pick a different approach. But in this case, let's say we want to pick a different airport, right? So let's go back to the field, and you do have to type it in. There's no way around that. Let's put in Lancaster. You see that it's automatically activates the pull down menu. Let's go down, VOR Alpha, we can pick APE again, and then it'll show a load and activate. If you hit load, it'll put it into the flight plan. So it's a little faster than all the other methods because it walks you through, it pulls down the menus for you to see. Also, I should point out that it changed the name of the flight plan. It did that every time we put in an approach. It picks up the name of the airport, whose approach it is, and then puts that into the flight plan. It doesn't really change the sequence of your waypoints. We're still going to Portsmouth, but as far as the approach is concerned, it thinks the flight ends at Lancaster. Just a point worth remembering. It's going to change its name every single time you put in a different approach. So that's the third method of putting in an approach. The advantage of that is that it'll walk you through, and it'll pull down the menus for you. Okay, and the fourth method, the last method, is by far the most used method, is to go to proc. And if there is an approach that is already loaded in, by default it's going to say, okay, do you want to activate the approach? But we want to select a different approach. You can do that too. Enter, and it's going to show the last approach that you picked. Let's say we want to change it, or you can even go and change the airport code. You could disable the cursor, go back here and type in a different airport. Let's try something different. That airport, I don't know where that is, but let's say it is, and you can pick this in a different transition, load, and there it is. It's loaded that approach, and it's also changed the flight plan name for you. So these are 4 different methods of loading approaches into it, but by far the simplest one is proc, because the nice thing about proc is that you could be anywhere in the menu system. You could be doing something deep inside, doing something like this. You hit proc, it'll bring you back to that menu. So that's pretty convenient. You don't need to navigate, or you don't need to do a lot of button pushing to get to that menu. Then you can select approach. The rest of it is the same. And again, another useful thing, as I mentioned before, is CLR. Press and hold CLR to come back to nav 1. So here is a little diagram to kind of illustrate all the different methods of entering an approach. You can go to waypoint menu, pick page 1, and then find your way to waypoint 4. That's the approach page, and then load and activate. We can go to nearest, and then go to waypoint waypoint 1, and then waypoint 4. It'll save you typing in the airport code. You can go into the flight plan page, hit the menu to invoke the select approach prompted command, and that'll take you to waypoint 4, but it'll pull down the menus for you. Or from anywhere in the system, you can pick proc and then select approach, and it'll do the same thing. So these are 4 different methods of achieving the same objective. If you want to restore the flight plan to a previous state, since we've obviously messed this up by putting different approaches, it's going somewhere else with a different approach. You could go into the saved flight plan that we originally made, highlight that, hit menu, and when you activate, it'll delete everything that was in the active flight plan and replace it with the original flight plan. It'll also activate the appropriate leg based on your position. Since we are still between Plum and Tartu, even though we are quite a bit a ways from it, we are way out there, but we are still between these two waypoints, therefore it activates that leg for you. Next, let's talk a little bit about the vectors to final, what that means. We need to load an approach. Let's just go into the nearest page, see what's nearby. There is here this airport nearby. Let's hit that. Go to waypoint 4. Let's pick a approach. This one, and let's leave it on vectors, even though there's many other transition. We're going to leave it on vectors. Load it into the active flight plan, and there it is. Just put it in, change the flight plan name. So what is vectors to final? So this approach begins at the final approach fix. That's the name of the final approach fix. There's the missed approach point and then missed hold. So even though it's showing the final approach fix as the first point of the approach, technically it really begins somewhere behind the final approach fix, a few miles behind it, and that becomes the leg that becomes activated. So we can actually see that if you go to nav 2, so here is the approach. It's not activated, that's why it's showing in white. This is the final approach fix, and this line here, it starts from out here somewhere and ends at the final approach fix. That becomes the VTF leg, or vectors to final leg. If we go and activate the approach, go into proc, activate vectors to final. We've already picked vectors to final, so it really doesn't matter at this point whether we pick this or this. The effect is the same. So it's activated that leg. If you zoom out a little bit further, you'll see, okay, it starts out here and several miles out, and then it comes and ends here. So this is the active leg. It starts from a point that is behind the final approach and ends at the final approach fix. We are expected to fly around and intercept this leg, anywhere in this leg, and then the sequencing will begin, just like any other en route navigation. If you're off course, you got to find your way and intercept it, and then proceed on course. On the other hand, if you select a different, so same airport but a different transition, let's say this nanny transition, let's go ahead and activate it. Here it's the first leg. If you go into the flight plan, it's taking you direct to nanny, and then a hold, and then the final approach fix. It's not taking you to the final approach fix directly, it's taking you to the initial approach fix. And on this page you can see this is your course that you need to fly to get to the initial approach, and then there's a holding pattern to do a course reversal followed by the final approach course. So that's the difference between picking a initial approach fix as a transition and picking the final approach fix as a transition. If you pick an initial approach fix, it'll draw a straight line from your current position to that initial approach fix. If you pick a VTF, it's going to draw a line behind the final approach fix extending a certain number of miles and activate that leg, and leaves it up to you to find your way around and intercept that. There is another important aspect that we should discuss, and that's when the GPS go into what's known as the suspend mode. It'll be illuminated here, SUSP, when it's suspending the auto sequencing function of the GPS. And that can happen in a few scenarios, and it's important to know why it's doing that and what to do about it. Let's pull up the approach chart to discuss that. So here's the VOR Alpha approach into Lancaster. So if you're flying this approach past the final approach fix here, descending towards the runway, as you are crossing the missed approach point of MAGCO, the GPS will go into suspend mode. It's doing that for several reasons. One is that there's a certain amount of hand flying that the pilot has to do after the missed approach point, namely climbing straight ahead to 2000, left turn, climbing to 3000, and then head back to the VOR. So all of that has to be done by the pilot, so it goes into suspend. If it doesn't, because the next action of the GPS will be to direct you towards the VOR, that's the missed approach hold. So you don't want to start turning like this. If you're on autopilot and it automatically sequences you, you will turn too soon. So it goes into suspend mode, and once you've completed all of these steps by hand, then you could unsuspend the GPS by pushing the OBS key to unsuspend it. So it's a very common scenario. It happens on every single approach. That's important to keep in mind. And there is a second way how the suspend mode will be invoked, and that is if you activate an approach while on the wrong side of the final approach fix, meaning that you are past the final approach fix. Let's say you are here at this point, somewhere here, attempting to go this way to intercept the final approach course on a vectors to final. So you're being vectored like this and intercepting here, but you are past the final approach fix in the sense of flying inbound, so you're here. So in this case, the GPS doesn't know whether you want to go to the missed approach point or whether you're intending on flying the full approach like this. In that case, it'll go into a suspend mode as well, and if you unsuspend it at that point, if you're sitting here and you unsuspend it, it'll take you directly to the missed approach point, which is not what you want. So what you want to do is wait till you're on the correct side of the approach and then unsuspend, and then it'll sequence you correctly. The reason that option is there is because, let's say you're flying along like this and you are somewhere here, and for whatever reason you have to reset and reload or reactivate the approach. In that case, you don't want to go backwards and start this again. You want to continue the approach. So in that case, you would hit unsuspend, and it'll sequence you to the missed approach point as expected. So since there are two possible scenarios, when you're here, you could be wanting to go to the missed approach point if you are already on the approach, but if you're just starting the approach, you'll have to go and intercept it behind the final approach fix. So it goes into suspend mode, and you wait until you get to behind the final approach fix and then unsuspend it. So that's two places where you see the suspend, and you will also see it when entering a hold. If the hold is indefinite, then it'll stay on this suspend until you unsuspend it, and there are sometimes you have to do a course reversal, which looks like a hold. There it'll unsuspend it only once. The second time you pass the fix, it'll unsuspend it and let you fly inbound. Okay, let's talk about the autopilot. This is a Garmin GFC500 autopilot. I should point out that this little display here for the commanded vertical speed is not really there in the real thing. I just put it in there because this display normally shows up on the G5 here, except in this particular implementation in Xplane, I don't have that display. So I decided to put a little display there. It's not really there on the real autopilot. The autopilot itself is divided into 3 sections: the control section in the middle, heading, lateral navigation on the left, and vertical navigation, altitudes and vertical speeds on the right hand side. This is the on-off key. Basically it energizes or de-engages the autopilot. If you disengage it, it's going to give you an alert, a tone, so you know its autopilot is off. This is a flight director, which should normally show a purple flight director on the G5. Again, on this particular implementation, I don't have that, so it's not really doing anything at the moment. The blue key is a emergency recovery key. If you get into an unusual attitude and want to recover, pressing this would bring you back to straight and level. Level the wings and pitch for straight and level flight. On the left hand side you have lateral navigation. So right now we are on a heading mode. Our heading is 030, and if I change that to 060 for example, it's going to bank and turn towards that heading. And if you are hand flying it, for example, and you're at some heading, so you're not on the heading control, you're some other heading and the heading bug is somewhere else, and if you were hand flying it up to this point, before you engage the heading control, you should bring this heading bug to our current heading. But there's an easy way to do that. If you push it, it'll sync the current heading bug to our current heading, so it'll move the heading bug to the current heading, so, and then you can engage the heading control. Nav does the same thing, except it will try to intercept the CDI to center the CDI. So it's going to pick a heading and fly towards that to center the CDI and capture the CDI and keep it centered. That's the nav function. Approach is pretty much the same as the nav, except it also has vertical control. It'll descend on a glide path towards the runway. On the right hand side we have of course altitude control, and we can dial in a different altitude. If you dial it at a different altitude like this, it doesn't climb on its own unless you also put in a vertical speed. And if you want to just bring it back to the current altitude, you can just push it. That'll sync the current altitude. So you can climb at a particular vertical speed. You could also climb at a particular indicated airspeed rather than vertical speed. This one is not implemented on this Xplane model, so can't show you that. This is the vertical speed control, so you roll it down to go up, and you roll it up to go down, just like the trim wheel on the airplane. Okay, so at this point I'm gonna bring it back to the original course where we were before we took that 030 heading turn. We are way outside here right now, so I need to reset everything back on the GPS and go into flight plan. I'm on some other approach here, but I can go into the catalog, select, that's the original flight plan, and then I can activate, and now I'm back to what it was. It's still holding the plumb Tarto leg. And now I can manually move the airplane back to the original position, and we'll resume from there and fly the approach. So I can pull up the approach here for Lancaster. So that approach is down here and we are out here, so it's hard to show both at the same time. But yeah, it's going to show us the airplane once we are repositioned. Okay, so we are where we left off when we took that 030 heading away from the original course. We are being vectored for the final approach into Lancaster, VOR-A approach. We are here, and here's the final approach course. So let's go ahead and load in the approach using the techniques that we just discussed. select approach. It's got Portsmouth still, so we have to go back and dial in our airport. We'll do vectors, and let's do activate as well. And there it is taking us to JUBBI. And if we go to the NAV2 page, you'll see here is the vectors to final leg that's being activated. We are here waiting to be vectored to intercept that course. This is a VOR approach. This is also a GPS approach, but we're going to fly it off with the VOR. So we need to be on the VOR station, not GPS. So right now, this is driving the CDI based on GPS. We have to switch it to the VOR, and that could be done by switching it to VLOC, and this will then turn green, indicating that it's getting the signals from the VHF or VOR radio. Also, if you didn't notice, when we activated the approach, it put in the VOR frequency into the standby slot of the GPS. So the frequency of this VOR is 116.7, and that's in the standby. And we could go ahead and activate it, and now it's giving us some guidance. And in order to be correct guidance, we need to put in the final approach course, which is 194. So let's put that in. So it's right now some other number. There's about 194. Okay, so we are set on that. There's VLOC, and we got receiving signal here. And another thing that I'm not sure whether you noticed, when we activated the flight plan, activated the approach, this GPS went into suspend mode. That was, the reason was, we were on the wrong side of the final approach. We were somewhere here, south of the final approach course. So it didn't want to automatically activate this leg, which would have taken us to the missed approach point, so it went into suspend. So we need to wait till we are on the correct side to unsuspend it. In fact, it'll automatically unsuspend once we intercept the final approach course. So we got to keep an eye on that. If it doesn't unsuspend, we should manually do that. Okay, so we are all set. We are at 3,000 feet, which is the intercept altitude at the final approach fix, and then we're going to descend down to 1580. So we could put that in here in the altitude, descent altitude, let the autopilot apply it, 1580, so we'll leave it at 1600. It's not going to descend until we put in a vertical speed, so we'll leave it at that. Wait for our vectors to turn us around. So we're about 9 miles out on an intercept for the final approach course. We should pull the power back to slow it down for the approach to the bottom of the green, get some carb heat, and we should do a approach plate briefing. So this is the VOR Alpha approach into the Fairfield County Airport. It's a VOR approach with the VOR frequency is 116.7, and that's being loaded in and active, and we're already on the VLOC mode. Final approach course is 194, which is dialed in here. We should check the weather. If you go to the waypoint 3 page and scroll down to ASOS, that'll put it in the standby and activate.
Fairfield Co-weather. Wind calm, visibility 3, rain. Sky conditions 950 overcast, temperature 13, dew point 11. Altimeter 2992.
Okay, we could also put the CTAF frequency on standby, and we can switch it when it's ready. And we are back on the nav1 page. Continuing with the brief, at the final approach fix, we should be at 3,000 feet, and we are currently at 3,000 feet. The minimum descent altitude, 1580, which we've already dialed in, 1600. The missed approach point is MAGCO. On the missed approach, we're going to straight ahead climb 2,000, climbing left turn to 3,000, back to the VOR and hold. So we are going to wait for the needle to come in and also our approach clearance.
7311 Sierra, 3 miles from JUBBI. Maintain 3000 until established. Cleared for the VOR Alpha approach into Fairfield County Airport.
Okay, so we got our approach clearance. This unit is still unsuspend. It should unsuspend as soon as you cross the final approach course, but if you don't, if your dialed in VOR course is slightly different from the GPS course, it's not going to unsuspend, so it is safe to do that now and unsuspend. And it's still taking you to JUBBI, and there's the course, and there you are in reference to the final approach course. 3 miles, and the needle is starting to come in. At this point we could switch to approach. There is no glide slope on this, but we could use nav as well, but for consistency we'll just use approach. There it is. It's turning towards the final approach course. And when we cross the final approach fix, we're going to start the descent, so we should have the vertical speed ready. So right now it's on vertical speed with the 0 vertical rate. And 1 mile out, we'll put the gear down and some flaps. Gear is coming down, and increase the flaps. The autopilot will take care of the pitch changes that are required to adjust for the drag and extra lift. Okay, now it has switched, so we could dial in a descent rate. We can put in 800. .6 miles to go. And you can see that this course is slightly offset from the actual course due to the position of how we can set the radial on here. Okay, that's 1,000 feet above the minimum descent altitude.
Seven 311 Sierra, change to advisory frequency approved. Contact me on the mist.
Okay, so now we can switch to advisory frequency, and we'll be making announcements on the CTAF, and we'll be looking out for the runway. It's still in the clouds. On the missed approach, we're going to be flying the same heading, climbing to 2,000 feet. So we'll be switching to heading mode. In anticipation of that, we can sync the heading. And There we are, leveled off, looking for the runway. 2.7 miles. And we should add some power. And we still don't see the runway. Two miles. Miles. And I think I see the runway. It's right here, starting from this end up to here. So this would be suitable to circle and land, but we're going to go and wait for the missed approach point and execute the missed approach. Just crossed the missed approach point. This has gone into suspend mode, so we're going to bring the power in, gear up, flaps up, and we're going to go to heading mode and climb to 2000. We could switch the GPS from VLOC and wait to get to 2,000 feet before we hand over the controls to the autopilot to do the turn. So right now we're still holding the heading. Okay, there's 2,000. We can unsuspend this. And there's the turn indication. It's backwards behind us. So we could go to nav. And there it is, beginning the left turn. And now we can climb to 3,000 feet. So on the missed approach, it's important to stay on the heading mode until you reach the safe altitude, specified safe altitude, which in this case is 2,000 feet, before starting the turn. So heading mode will make sure you're flying straight ahead, and then you unsuspend and switch the navigation mode from heading to navigation. So there we are, coming up to 3,000 feet, heading straight to the VOR. And at this point, we would request instructions for what to do next. So in our case, we want to resume our trip to Portsmouth. So that's what we would request from ATC.
November 7311 Sierra. Climb to 5,000, then proceed direct to hard tow. Victor 493. Road intersection. Romeo, Oscar, Hotel, Delta, Echo. Expect the RNAV 18 approach into Portsmouth.
So our clearance is to climb to 5,000 feet and then to Tarto intersection, which was on our original flight plan, and then a new intersection, road intersection along Victor 493, and then to our destination at Portsmouth, RNAV 18 approach. So let's do the climb first. Put 5,000 and put in a vertical speed, and it's climbing. And we have to change the GPS. Right now we're headed to the missed approach hold, Appleton VOR. And while we are changing it, we don't want the airplane to be chasing in different directions as we are changing it, so we should sync the heading bug and put it on heading mode while we change anything here. So let's get into the flight plan here. So right now we're heading to Appleton. Let's switch the map here so we can see where we are. So there's Lancaster Airport. We're heading away from it, and this is Tarto here, and we are going to go to road intersection and then to Portsmouth. So here we have Tarto and then Portsmouth, so we need to insert a new fix. So highlight the field prior to which you want to insert the fix and turn the small knob and type in the fix name. There it is, that's the fix, and now it has inserted it between Tarto and Portsmouth. And we could also change the approach while we are here. So hit menu, select approach. Now by default it's showing us Lancaster because that's where we just were. Go back here. RNAV 18. Now we don't know which transition we're going to fly. Originally we had selected NAUGT transition. We'll just leave it. We can always change it later at the last minute. We'll leave that in here. Now, interestingly, it only gives me an option to activate. Didn't say just load. That's because the currently loaded approach, which is to Lancaster, it's active. We are flying the missed approach portion of that approach, so it's only giving me a replacement and the same activation. So if I hit that here, it's going to activate it. Doesn't matter because I'm still flying the heading, and that's why it was important to switch to the heading mode while we are doing all of this. So it's now, see, it's pointing to NAUGT. If we were on nav, it would have started turning around. So let's go here now. Now let's take a look here. So we need to go to Tarto. There's another option here, activate leg. Now this is not what you want to do, but let's take a look at what happens if you do that. If you activate that leg, plumb to Tarto, this is not what you want because look at the map on nav2 here. You can see we are up here flying away towards the VOR, and Tarto is here, and it's activated this leg. It's telling you to go intercept that leg, and that's not what our instruction was. We had to go fly direct to Tarto. So we can go back into the flight plan, highlight Tarto. Instead of saying activate the leg, we say direct to that leg, enter, enter, and now it's drawn a direct line from our current position to that intersection, and it's giving us a right turn 192 heading. At this point, we're at 5,000, so we could switch to nav mode. It should turn us towards the Tarto intersection. So there it is. It's turning right back towards Tarto. So if you go into the flight plan, you'll see it's got a straight line here, a right arrow saying Tarto instead of that curly brace from Plum to Tarto. Basically, this is created a third point from which you are entering the flight plan. So the third point is here, where we are now, entering the original route. So now we are about 2 miles from Tarto, about to join that next leg. Giving us the next course, 190. Okay, there it is. It's almost the same course as before. And now it's going to take us to the road intersection from this point. Okay, we're about 9 miles from the road intersection.
One Sierra, descend to 3000. Proceed direct to NAUGT, cleared for the RNAV 18 approach into Portsmouth.
Okay, we got approach clearance. Descend to 3000, proceed direct to NAUGT. So let's put in 3000. Vertical speed. And we should pull the power back so we don't overspeed. And then we need to proceed direct to NAUGT. So in the flight plan, NAUGT was our initial approach fix. So we could simply do proc and activate the approach, and that's going to take us directly to NAUGT, and the airplane will start turning towards it. Let's pull up the approach chart. There we are. We're coming here towards NAUGT, and then we're going to fly the rest of the approach. We should do an approach briefing. So we got the RNAV 18 approach, and we're flying direct to NAUGT. The final approach course is 183. Final approach fix is NAUGT. We should get the weather, and we can go to waypoint page, waypoint 3. There's the AWOS. Put it on standby.
Greater Portsmouth Regal weather. Wind calm, visibility 2, rain. Sky conditions 750 overcast, temperature 13, dew point 11. Altimeter 2992.
Okay, we could also load the CTAF into the standby when we need to switch. And we're back here and continuing with the brief. It's an LPV approach, so we should get an LPV flag once we are on the on the approach. It's aligned with the runway, obviously, and the fuel elevation is 663. We'll be approaching 1.8 like this, and the minimum descent or LPV decision altitude is 1010, 1.25 mile visibility. Okay, we're level at 3,000. The initial approach altitude after we turn from Meggy is going to be 2,600 feet, so we'll watch for that. We can bring the power back in a bit. Three and a half miles to go to Yanuug. And after we capture the initial approach fix, we can go to approach mode. This is an LPV approach, so we do have a glide path guidance. We should be able to follow it down all the way to our decision height of 1010. Two miles to Yanuug. And we should have also reviewed the missed approach instruction on this. It's straight ahead climb 3,000 back to the Evreux fix, and the Evreux fix is here. It's over here. It's not back on the approach course. Straight ahead Evreux is somewhere down here. Alright, we are almost at Yanuug. There it is, the airplane's turning on the first leg of the approach. And we can go into approach mode here. We can slow it down. The slower you fly in the approach, the more time it buys, and time is very useful when you're flying an approach, unless ATC asks you to maintain a particular speed. So Yanuug to Meggy is our current leg, and we're going to turn at Meggy and go to final approach fix, which is NAUGT. Okay, there's the left turn coming up. 184 is going to be the new course. And there's the turn. Okay, this GPS has switched to the LPV mode, so we can use the LPV minimum of 1010. That's the LPV minimum, 1010. So now at this leg we can also descend to 2600. Vertical speed.
One Sierra, change to advisory frequency approved. Report cancellation in the air or on the ground at 128.4.
Okay, so now we can switch to CTAF, and we'll be making the announcement on the CTAF. We're on the heading towards NAUGT, the final approach fix, 2600 feet, waiting for the glide path to arrive, and that's the red dot there. We're still below the glide path, as we should be. 2 miles to go. And the ball is just starting to move. One mile. And when we are one dot above the glide path, we can put the gear in flaps and commence our descent towards the runway. And the decision altitude is 1010. Okay, there it is. Gears coming down. Some flap. Those pitch oscillations are the autopilot correcting for the flap and the gear. 1010, so we could put this in here as a reminder, but we're not really descending based on that. Okay, and now we are just waiting for the runway to come in sight. Tickle, that's the next fix, and then the missed approach point is after that. From Tickle, it's 2.8 nautical mile to runway 18. So we got 1.8 nautical mile to Tickle. That's the 1,000 foot alert based on the number we dialed in on the altitude. But we're not really descending to that. We're letting the LPV glide path take us down, and we'll look up and see if we can identify the runway before we get to that altitude. Okay, 0.6 miles to Tickle, and then after that 2.8 nautical miles to runway 18. Okay, we're about to switch. Okay, so now the next leg, this is the last leg, Tickle to runway 18, which is the missed approach point, which is identified here. And I'm starting to see the ground. 1,300 feet. And there's the runway appearing in the distance. 1,200 feet. .1,100 feet. We're all configured for landing. Gears down, flaps. At this point we would be taking over, disengage the autopilot and fly it manually below the decision altitude and proceed with the landing. Okay, thank you for joining me on this flight. I hope you learned something about the Garmin and the GFC and Xplane. We'll see you next time.